What is up, everyone? Welcome to Making the Grade, where we look at the PFF grades from the most recent Arizona Cardinals game. And this was not a great game. In fact, they tweeted out that, this game was a test for the Cardinals. And yeah, that was a big fat F. So the Cardinals as a whole didn't make the grade. This was a really important game in terms of just kind of getting a sense where they were, right? They came out, played Buffalo tough, but lost. And you look at the okay, Buffalo's a good team. So maybe, this is still a good team, right? And they come out and they blow out the Rams. And they're like, okay, we're feeling good. And then they come back and they lose to the Lions in a close game where they didn't look great, but Lions are good teams. Like, okay, they lost to two teams that were in their championship games, conference championship games last year. So, okay, we got the Washington Commanders coming up. They're, a team that's been playing well, right? They're 3-1, but rookie quarterback, some questions about, maybe some of the positions in the roster. Their defense has not been good. Their offense has carried that team, and there's data to back that up. So we looked at this as, okay, this is a team that we feel like we should be able to beat, right? If the Cardinals are a good team, Commanders have been good this year, but this is a team that, we we're one score away from being the Lions and one score away from being Buffalo, and we blew out the Rams. Well, then maybe Commanders are one of those teams that, is better than people thought they would be, but that we should be able to beat. And no, it didn't go that way at all. In fact, they kind of treated us like we were the Rams, right? It was ugly. So we're going to look at the grades, talk about what they're telling us. What did the data show us? There's some stories and there are some things to look at. So, and I think some interesting things to talk about. So, and one of those things that we'll get at, Silver Wolf AZ, thanks for the comment. Garrett Williams is starting to show he's an NFL caliber starter. Absolutely. He looked really good, had that interception, and he graded well. We've loved him since they drafted him, thought he was just a really great pick, a guy who's recovering from injury, would have gone much earlier, obviously, if it hadn't been for that. And he looked good, and the grades reflected that. So, yeah, Zach Phillips, what is up? Thanks for being here. What's up, Professor? Appreciate you hanging out with us tonight. So, the game, was 42-14. Cardinals scored first, but then the Commanders just, piled on the points after the points, and Cardinals put up another 7. And yeah, this Sunday it was a very depressing game, right? As Thunder points out. So, Kyler Murray, his quarterback rating was 104.7, which is not bad. His QBR wasn't as good, 28.2. But, he didn't have any interceptions or turnovers, but, he had one touchdown, but only 142 yards, so that's not great. He was sacked 4 times. James Daniels, put up more yards. He had 1 interception and 1 touchdown, but overall, I think that, his QBR was better. James Conner had a solid game. I tweeted out during the game that James Conner looked good, but that's not enough, right? Benson, had a nice game, 50 yards and 9 carries. So, Marvin Harrison Jr. got another touchdown, didn't do a lot outside of that, but had a really nice touchdown and a really nice throw from Kyler, in the red zone. So, we'll get into it though. Let's real quick though, I want to look at something. And, one of the things, Kyler Murray is kind of, he's a quarterback, so he's going to be the topic of conversation. And, he didn't have a great game. I don't think it was as bad as people thought it was, but it wasn't great. He graded very mediocre. I think there were some things that weren't working in terms of the passing concepts that aren't helping out. And some people are starting to look at those things a little bit more. And I think there's some coaching stuff going on. But, I think people are kind of, really down on him. And again, he's a very polarizing figure and people are going to have their opinions about him. I've been a staunch supporter of him, from the beginning. He's had his ups and downs, but overall he's been a good quarterback. But for all the positives and negatives or whatever, when you look at it, like this is, these are kind of league leaders. In quarterback rating, he's 7th. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8th. I guess there's some ties in there, but he's in the top 10 in quarterback rating. ESPN's QBR, he's also in the top 10. He's not in the top 10 in yards. He hasn't put up a ton of yards. They run a lot and he runs a lot, but his completion percent, top 10. His touchdowns, he's, 6 top 10, 6 touchdowns, 1 interception. for all the things we want to talk about with him, he's still been pretty good player overall. I mean, the overall statistics are good. I know the wins aren't there, but what I'm saying is, like, people are making it sound like he's a lost cause or something. At least some fans are. And when we look at PFF grade for quarterbacks, right? He's 7th. Or is it tie? Yeah, there's some ties in there, but like it's in top 10 PFF rating, right? His pass rating, still in the top 10 for pass grade. Like, for as bad as the last 2 games were to some fans, like, he's still grading in the top 10 in like pretty much everything except, every positive category except for yards. And again, he runs a lot and they run a lot. So he's never, been a guy who's, high yardage, more efficiency. So, like, there's quarterbacks that they're like Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, Trevor Lawrence, Matthew Stafford, Justin Herbert, like even Jared Goff statistically isn't playing as well, overall. So I think people need to kind of pump the brakes on the, oh my God, Kyler's, whatever the negatives about him. We need to see some improvement, but I think it's an overall. I think there's some things with the passing, the way things are going in terms of the play calling on the passing side of things. The run game is fine for the most part, but the passing is. I think Petzing's got some work to do there. I'm not saying Kyler isn't pressing; he has been pressing, but he's also been in some tough situations. Get a couple other comments. Mizaki Felix, I'm afraid this is what we're going to see every week from defense, expecting this offense to be perfect every week. Week to high defense isn't tenable. I mean, the defense is a work in progress. It's better than it was last year. It really is. This was a rough week, but the defense still better. But absolutely, there's a lot of young players on there they're trying to develop. They clearly went to get the offense right first in terms of how they were building the roster, and then the defense is kind of now what they're working on. And they're gonna add some talent in this offseason. I mean, it's better than it was, but it's definitely still needs a lot of work, right? And part of that there's 2 parts to that. One part is bringing in talent. The other part is getting the talent to develop, right? So part of it is they've got some young guys like, and we'll talk about Max Milton had a nice game. You got some young guys who need to kind of develop and find their footing and then hit their prime. And then they need to bring in more of those they need to continue to add to that. And it takes some time for that to happen. So again, rebuilds are, in my view, a 3-year process is year 2. So, they could or should they have brought in another pass rusher? Probably. But I trust the process. Maybe some people think I'm naive for that, but I do. Thunder saying the scripted series looked great and then it falls apart. So, and that may be, again, that, Petzing's a first-time offensive coordinator. So there's part of me that also says give him a little bit of time to kind of get his footing. Let's see how it looks by the end of the season, right? But, if he doesn't have it figured out by the end of the season, then we have to talk about it, But, yeah. Dana, let's see. Dana says, Rams game, Kyler was making reads and throwing on rhythm out of drop back. Against Lions and Commanders, he would get to that point and keep holding the ball for whatever reason. Yeah. Though we'll talk about time to throw, and we're going to look at that in a bit because there's some interesting things to look at that with this game. But, yeah, he got sacked sometimes by holding on to it. And he got sacked 4 times, and that was the most since week 1 for him. Mizaki Felix's defense performance was almost identical to one last week in Detroit, with the exception of passing yards. Okay, at least in terms of some of the statistics. What is up, Marcos? Thanks for being here, Marcos Labrada, a co-host of the Redbird Reboot podcast. Good to see you, buddy. Mizaki saying, I trust the process well. I think it's a 6, and this is a 6-11 team. Yeah, I mean, it might be. I was feeling more optimistic earlier, but at the same time, listen, weekly results are high variance. I tweeted about this. Like, if you look at the teams that are 3-1, all of them have a bad loss, like a 30-something to 7 or 30-something to 14 loss. Like, even the 3-1 teams, they're like, or I shouldn't say all of them, but like there are 3 or 4 of them that I cited that have a bad loss. So, like, having one bad loss, you got to wait and see. You need a bigger sample size. And so, yeah, I know they're 1-3, but 2 of those losses are against good teams. So if this is their only getting their butt kicked loss, like really badly, and the rest of the season they win some games and maybe lose some tight ones, then this is, to me, I'm just going to say, okay, this was an outlier. But if they have more of these, then I will absolutely be concerned. But I don't want to overreact to one bad loss. Again, it's a long season. We got to see how that variance works out. Again, there's a lot of other teams who have a bad loss on their record too this year. So, but let's get to the grades, right? Looking at the offensive grades, and I always like to start with the offensive line. So we'll kind of sort it by pass blocking, snaps. And what we see here, Paris Johnson Jr. is really looking like he's the real deal. And, he last year his grade was mediocre at right tackle, but I think, again, part of that was playing a position that's not his true natural position. He was good enough, but he's, moving back to his natural position and then having another year under his belt, he's really looking like he's the real deal as a starting left tackle. We look at his overall, like his grades all year, they've been good every week. He hasn't had a bad week. 66 is his lowest grade, and that's definitely above average. So that's some really good consistency. And you see his overall season grade is 83.5. I mean, solid. That's like, really love to see that in his second year. So, we love what we're seeing from that. And overall, the offensive line graded reasonably well. Evan Brown had a little bit of a down game, more based on the run blocking, but everyone else was, in the green. But I want to point out something here, because I do think we have to look at something. And they graded well, but Kyler also got sacked 4 times, and they had a hard time moving the ball. And when you look at like the distribution of Kyler's throws, there were a lot of shallow throws. And I actually want to look at Kyler's stats because I think they're very telling about something. And this is kind of where you have to put data in context. PFF grades, I know I've been a defender of them, and I think they are a good data point, but they make more sense when you put them in context. And I'm going to give you some context because the offensive line grades are good, right? They're solid. And I'm not saying they didn't play reasonably well, but I think there's a couple things context-wise we're going to look at here that are going to say something for us. They're going to kind of give us a different perspective on that. And I'll start with the very first thing here, okay? And that is that Kyler Murray, okay, there's this thing, this TTT right here is time to throw, okay? And that's how long until he throws the ball, gets rid of the ball, okay, on average. Well, you look at this, 2.39 seconds. First 2 weeks, he had 3.30, 3.17, over 3 seconds. And then, last week it was less, 2.8. And this week, 2.39. And he's getting the ball. He got the ball out really quick, or he got sacked because he had 4 sacks, right? And if you look at I've seen like the kind of the chart of all his throws, and he didn't throw deep a lot, right? So he was getting rid of the ball quickly, whether that was by design or by necessity. The ball was getting out quicker, okay? And for offensive line, like the longer you have to block, the harder it is to block, right? That's just kind of a thing there. Like, when the quicker you get the ball out, it's the same thing. Like the longer you have to do something, like in terms of blocking or covering, the harder it is to do it. That's like, a cornerback, if they have to cover a receiver, for a long time, there's a point where you can't hold that coverage well. That's why plays that kind of scramble plays and where Kyler extends the plays is so effective, because the defensive backs can't cover those receivers forever and someone gets open, right? Well, there's sort of a similar dynamic with kind of pass blocking, right? That, if the quarterback gets the ball out quickly, then you're not having to hold off those, those pass rushers as long, and you're not going to get beat as easily, right? But if you're holding the ball longer, the degree of difficulty is higher, right? And those edge rushers have more time to kind of get around you and such. So what I'm saying here is, even though the grades were pretty good for the offensive linemen, I wonder how much of that was a function of they didn't have to hold the ball. They didn't have to hold their assignments blocking as long because the ball was getting out more quickly, except for those times when it was a sack, right? But when it wasn't a sack, it seems like the ball was getting out more quickly, so they didn't have to block as long. So in terms of the grading, when the graders are watching them, they're not having to hold their block as long, so they're not getting beat, right? Because the ball is getting out more quickly, except for those, those few plays where they are beat. But maybe let me put it this way: there are plays where they might have gotten beat if that had been half a second longer, right? If it had been a little bit longer, but the ball was getting out, so ball get out before they got beat. So I think that's part of what's going on there, right? With that. So I think when you take that into context, like even though the offensive lineman graded pretty well, some of that might have been a little bit kind of inflated or a little bit affected by the fact that they got the ball more quickly. But that's also, probably a problem, because here's another thing. Right. I think that, I believe this is average depth of target right here, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's what it is. AD, looking at this here, it truncates that, so it's hard to see it all, but I think, maybe that's not it. No, that's okay. No, that's the adjusted percent. Nope, looking in the wrong place, but I feel like his depth of target wasn't as far. Let me see if I can get this so I can see it. Okay. Yeah. ADOT, average depth of target. Okay. No, that is it right there. Okay. So this right here, this average depth of target right here. Okay. Look at like 6.7 yards, right? Compared to 12.4, 10.7. First week it was 6.5, right? So I think there's another kind of part of that. Like they were getting the ball quickly and not going as deep. And that also is part of the reason I think, they weren't taking their shots apparently, and maybe they weren't there. I don't know. Kyler wasn't scrambling as much. He wasn't creating as much. So he had one scramble for 5 yards, I think is what this is saying here. Right. Yeah, you have to take some of that context. Let's get a couple comments and we'll get back to the grades. Let's see. I think the Rams game was the outlier. Yeah. I think it's probably an outlier. I don't think this Cardinals team is good enough that they're beating teams like that consistently, but they can both be outliers. You can have more than one outlier. Marcos, maybe the early heat charts are out for every QB. Are they? That'd be interesting to see. Mazaki, I look forward to these all week. You're the most honest Cardinals country career. Thank you. I appreciate that. I try to, I'm not always going to be right, but I try to be as honest as I can, though I probably lean a little optimistic, but that's kind of, who I am. Nick, I'm starting to hate Sundays. It's been rough, right? Yeah. Last couple weeks. All right. So offensive line graded well. Love what we're seeing out of Paris Johnson Jr. I still feel like they're doing a good job building this offensive line. They've got some young guys you want to see crack the lineup at some point and develop. But I think there's a little bit of something there. Zach Felix, I'm a history professor, not as bad professor. I'll trust you. Okay. Hey, well, yeah, I have some friends that are history professors. I teach sociology, so we're both looking at kind of some things maybe from different perspectives, but there's a little overlap there, right? Looking at societies in different ways. Offensive line graded reasonably well, but I think there's some details we have to take into account with that. So now let's get by positions, looking at the tight ends. Obviously, we were without Trey McBride, right? And that's certainly a big – that is a big kind of issue, right? He's a big part of this offense, and that certainly, I think, was certainly missed. I don't think that was the difference between the win and loss necessarily by itself. But it was certainly part of it. But Tip Raymond, on 25 snaps, really good in terms of his blocking, had a nice grade. It was nice to see that. Higgins, a guy that we were hoping would step up, had a rough game, right? Didn't grade really well. And then, Vokalek, stepped in. He was kind of the fourth guy and having to play that third tight end, didn't grade particularly well in limited snaps. So, Ryman did a nice job as the blocking side of things, right? And then Higgins didn't have a great game, so that certainly hurt. looking at the receivers, Pascal had 6 snaps. We're not really going to, that was not a ton. That was really towards the end. I'm guessing, I could be wrong here. But Dortch, he had a nice game grade wise. He didn't get I don't think he had a lot of, I don't think they targeted him much. Let's see. Greg Dortch, 4 receptions on 4 targets. Okay. He got the ball a little bit. So actually that's second in leading on the targets. No one got targeted a lot actually in the passing game. So, but, he graded reasonably well. Michael Wilson, not great, right? He had a little bit of a rough game. I think there were some drops and stuff there. Chris Moore, limited snaps. Let's see. Then Marvin Harrison had a nice game, right? He 78.9. He graded well. And, we're seeing, he had that first game was rough for him, but he's been really good since then, grading 78.1 overall. And, as frustrating as this game was, and, the record is right now, there's some things to be optimistic about. And one of those is we got a dude, right? I mean, we all believe Marvin Harrison was going to be good. And now we've got that reality. We've got a dude and we're seeing it. And he's looking like, yeah, he only had 40 something yards this game, but that the whole offense struggled, but you see that touchdown, right? And just that route in the red zone and that was just such a great play and catch and just some of the plays we've seen from him. The future is bright for MHJ. So really excited about that, right? So a building block. So, receivers, Harrison and Dortch graded reasonably well. Wilson, not so much. Other receivers were very limited snaps. Looking at the running backs, Benson, 62.1 is he had a nice statistical game. His grade's okay. DeMarcado, so. Connor, 75.3, solid grade. In terms of the pass blocking, both of them didn't grade well, but the running grade for Connor was 78.7. And I thought he looked good. He had some really nice runs overall. And then, we get to Kyler Murray, the quarterback, 59.2. Again, not a great grade. It's not, it's not as it's 60 is kind of the very middle, didn't do anything great or horrible great, just really blah, right? And so it's a little below average, right? But obviously you want your quarterback to be above average. Let's see, Dana's K1 had 4 throws over 10 air yards this week. So part of the game plan does appear to have been shorter routes and concepts this week. That also explains Marvin Harrison Jr. more limited targets with deep routes. Yeah. So whether it was a game, it probably was a game plan thing with as much as when you have that many of them. And I'll tell you, the Commanders cornerbacks aren't great. They've struggled with their defensive backs. So, they really could have and should have taken some shots, right, against this defense, some more shots. But so when we look at the offensive side, again, the offensive line graded okay, pretty good, but I think some of that, again, was influenced by some other things. Some of the receivers, James Conner graded pretty okay, but this is a team that put up 14 points. So, the grades are kind of but the result wasn't great, right? So then we look at the defense. And the defense, there's a bright spot here, but if you look at the kind of the distribution of grades, it was worse. And of course, they gave up 42 points, so that should not surprise you, right? A lot more yellows and oranges here, right? So let's go by. We're going to go by positions here. Let's start with the coverage units. Garrett Williams. Now, it's interesting. They have him here at strong safety, so that which they probably play. Which that really is just where they end up grading him more. So he probably had more snaps there than. In fact, let's take a look at that because that is kind of interesting. I hadn't noticed that before, but his snap alignment, defensive alignment, right? Alignment, snap count. This is the box, this free safety slot. So in this game, interesting, they had him set aside. He did have more snaps in the box, right? That's the box safety position. Though he had more snaps at slot corner than box. I'm wondering why they have it set that way. Clearly they used him more. He lined up more kind of in that box area where they identify him as a safety, which is just by they identify that based on where they're positioned at. And that's actually when I worked part-time doing some PFF stuff, that's one of the things I did is identify where a player was. And they have it based on where they are, like how far off the line of scrimmage and a couple other considerations. So what this really tells you is he lined up closer to the line of scrimmage and more kind of in the middle of the field and not really like man-to-man on someone as much for those snaps. So they had, for something they did, they lined him up more there. So anyway, but yeah, I mean, he graded really well, right? 77.5, 82.8 coverage grade, had the interception, right? So love what we're seeing from him. Jalen Thompson struggled, and Jalen Thompson is having a rough season. I love JT. I think he's been a great player for us. His grades throughout his career have been pretty good, but he's having a down year. I know Kyle Odegaard tweeted out something about his kind of Pro Football Reference stuff about the quarterback rating allowed, right? And that hasn't been good. And here it is. Like he's allowed a quarterback rating, at least PFF has, is of 145.5, right? He's had a rough season. It hasn't been good for him this year. And I love JT, right? I think he's been a good player for him, but it hasn't been good this year, right? So far. And I don't know if it's because it's a scheme fit or what they're asking of him, but that's a thing to consider, like, what's going on with him there. So we'll see. I don't know what it is. Buddha had a little bit of a rough game, right? His tackle grade was pretty okay, but wasn't his best game grade wise. But of course, one of the things we talked about with Buddha, a lot is asked of him. So some of that is sometimes the degree of difficulty, but nonetheless, it wasn't great. Let's see any other safeties. The free safety Rabbit played 2 snaps, so that's not really gonna enough to really fairly evaluate him. And then we look at the cornerback. Keetra, 1 snap, really not enough to, it's really, you can't evaluate that really. But Max Melton had a game. I 21 snaps, so it was a little bit limited. He wasn't full-time starter or anything, right? A little under half the snaps, but he had a nice number of snaps, or better than what he's had in some other weeks, right? In fact, this was the second most he's had, right? In week 2 against LA, he had 25, then he had 21 here, right? And he's had some up and downs. He's a rookie, but this is the coverage grade, 85.4, right? This is what we want to see out of him. We want to see progress, and we want to see him take that starting job. And listen, Starling Thomas, for an undrafted free agent to be starting, he's done a nice job. To be starting as an undrafted free agent is better than expected, right? He's overachieving based on what you would expect from an undrafted free agent. But his grade 57.5 isn't great, right? And he's had a good game here or there, but some bad games. We want, no offense to Starling Thomas. Sure, he's a great dude, but like, you want your second round pick to win that job, right? Max Melton has the physical traits. They drafted him for a reason. You want him to win that job. So you want to see games like this, right? So that was definitely nice to see, right? And then, so Starling Thomas didn't have a great game. Actually had a pretty bad game, right? And then we've got, Murphy Bunting had a tough game as well. And people have been very critical of Murphy Bunting, and I'll say he hasn't been great, but the one caveat I want to throw in there is he's cornerback 1, so he's drawing the toughest coverages. And he is a guy who should be cornerback 2 on a team, really. But they brought him in as a veteran to kind of stabilize the room and to let some of the younger players get some experience. So there's a strategy there. But I think to some degree we have to give him at least a little bit of a break in that he's being asked to cover the best receivers, right? The number 1 receivers most of the time. And that's not who he really is. He's really more of a cornerback 2 on a team. So, but again, it hasn't been great. But I just think I don't know that I think if you put any one of our other cornerbacks in the same spot, they might struggle too, right? What you really want is you want for Max Melton to develop into a true number one who can get there and do that. He's not there yet, obviously. So those are the cornerbacks. Let's get a couple of comments because I know we got some stuff in here. Voight Royal, thank you for love the content. Thank you. I appreciate that. Appreciate you being here, hanging out with us. Data saying Jalen Kazir have not been good this year. Both were sent last year. The switch to cover 3 as a primary show may be part of. Yeah, I think that's good chance that's part of it. Changes in system, right? And yeah, neither of them have been particularly good. Garrett Williams played as half field safety and cover 5 on the interception. Interesting. Okay. Dana saying last year we played about 40% cover 4. That's the stat for cover 3 this year. Interesting. Okay. Cover 4, yeah, quarters, right? Yeah. Oh, Dana's saying yes and no. There are cover 4 plays like palms, for example, and then match coverage variants of those. Okay. So, and maybe some of those changes in defenses and coverage is part of what's going on there, right? So when you look at the cornerbacks, I will say, even though this wasn't a good game overall, there are some things that are silver linings here, right? Garrett Williams, nice game, right? Guy that we really like and we think is going to be an important part of this team moving forward. Has a grade of 67.6 so far this year. Had a rough game against Detroit, but aside from that, has been good, right? And then we saw a really nice game, on part-time snaps, but a reasonable amount from Max Milton, right? So, a couple things to be at least to feel good about there in that regard. Now, let's look at the defensive ends and defensive tackles, and then we'll come back to the edge, and then we'll get to the linebackers. So Dante Stills, he played 38 snaps, so a decent number of snaps, wasn't super effective, had a 57 grade. We loved him last year. This year, it's been a little bit rough start. In fact, was inactive for one game, I think. Had one sack against Detroit. So, we want to see him kind of get back up to speed. LJ Collier, for him, this is actually a good game, 55.1. He hasn't been great, for us at all. It's been rough, right? That's the story of his career. This was sadly one of his better games. Angelo Blackson, a guy they actually recently picked up, 23 snaps, graded reasonably well, right? And this is a guy who's been with us before, I believe. In 2020. He's got a journeyman who's bounced around, has had a mediocre career, but just one game, so don't want to overreact one way or the other. But he had a reasonable game. No sack of Roy Lopez, not a great game for him. We love Roy Lopez, but this was not a great game for him. His grade 50.9. And then Bilal Nichols actually had a reasonable game. He was probably the best, other than Blackson, in terms of his grade on that defensive kind of tackle, defensive line, interior defensive lineman. And I know he's one of those free agents that we've been a little bit disappointed in. He had a good game against the Rams on limited snaps, but hasn't been good other than that. So this was actually his second best game. So, it wasn't great, but it wasn't horrible. It was pretty average-ish, right? Now, so that's what we got there. Now, let's see. Let's get a couple of comments, and then we'll get back to this. Marcos and Dana having a conversation about coverages and defense. So let that conversation be there. William Martin, thanks for being here. Please bring Michael Carter up from the practice squad. James Conner, Michael Carter, 1-2 punch. Carter was averaging 5.8 yards per carry last year. Yeah, Carter's really good. He's a nice change of pace back. I think the tough part for him is it's a numbers game. They want DJ Dallas for the return game. Certainly he had that one touchdown, though he also had a fumble, but they like him for that. And Benson, you're not going to be able to get him through the practice squad. He'd get claimed right away. It's tough. It was a numbers game, and the fact that Carter is still on the practice squad means they believe that, he can stick around. But, they also have the weekly call-up, so maybe if they could, find a way to do it, that'd be nice. He certainly was good for them last year. All right, let's get to the edge rushers. Zayden Collins, he had a decent game. The tackling grade was a little bit low. His pass rush grade wasn't great. He did have one pressure and a hit. This was, this was actually his. It wasn't, it was his third best, second worst game. He's been good for him this year, but the pass rush grade hasn't been great. We've talked about that a lot. He's still learning to be an edge rusher. He did get one sack. He's got some pressures, but that's not his strength right now. Is the pass rushing moves, right? And so it continues to grade like that, right? So this was an game for him. Okay, 66 not a bad grade. Look at the other edge rushers. Dennis Gardeck had a really rough game, right? He didn't grade well, 37.9. His pass rush grade was low. His run defense grade was, his coverage grade was low. His tackling grade was the only one that wasn't low. So Gardeck is kind of up and down, hit or miss, right? Okwara, not a great grade for him either, right? Mac Wilson Senior, they have him as out. He's lined up on the outside a bit. His grade was, again, very mediocre, right? Very just slightly below average, not his best game, right? So the edge rushers, not surprisingly, we know getting pressure has been a problem. The pass rush has been a problem, and the grades reflect that, right? And I know there was a quote from Gannon that has been going around on social media about him saying he feels like we're getting, our pass rushes are affecting the quarterback, and people are kind of rolling their eyes at that. And that's fair. They're not. They've had one good game, it feels like, and the pass rush we knew it was going to be an issue. With BJ Ojulari and Darius Robinson both injured. They didn't address it with free agency really. So it's definitely the position they have to hit this next offseason, whether it be the draft, free agency, or both, right? Then we get to the middle linebackers or inside linebackers. Papo, only 3 snaps for Owen Papo. So this is a guy who's, second year, graded pretty well in his rookie year, but has struggled this year. Had one good game, but he struggled, right? Now he's played limited snaps, right? So I think he's a guy who's struggling and seems to be seeing less playing time now. Dimakaji, 1 snap, it was as a middle linebacker, so that it's a 1 snap that really isn't really even worth talking about. But Kaiser White, Dana said he's been struggling. This was actually the grade's below average, but this is sadly his second best game of the year. He's been struggling for us this year. They're just pretty not another way to say it. It's been rough for him. Chris Barnes, limited snap, graded reasonably well, but it's only 8 snaps, right? Oh, I missed Xavier Thomas, and he only played 7 snaps, but he graded pretty well, and he had a couple pressures, and so that's a small sample size, but I do want to point out this is a guy, I think, 5th rounder, pass rusher out of Clemson, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And he was a guy that, because of the story behind him, had some struggles and challenges, and was a highly recruited player, and in terms of college. And he's a guy that, some people were hoping would step up, right, and be a pleasant surprise with the injuries to the pass rushers. And he hasn't been good so far, but this was on limited snaps his best game, two pressures and a 70.1 grade. So it's small sample size, it's 1 game, but maybe it's something to watch, right? See if it's maybe he's some things are starting to click. Here's hoping, right? So overall, though, not surprisingly, when you give up 42 points, your grades aren't going to be great on defense, right? But there are, again, Melton and Williams give us some hope, right? There's some pieces to build around, right? Real quick, let's look at real quickly look at the Washington stat grades. Zacchaeus, right, had a great game, limited stats, but he was very effective. Daniels had a really good game. The running back Nichols, solid game. Robinson, they ran against us. There's no surprise there. Terry McLaurin had a nice game. He's been a little bit slow going this year, but he had a nice game. When you look at their offensive line, Cosme wasn't great, but Bjadic was pretty good. Wiley, Algretti, okay-ish. Coleman, pretty good, right? And Lucas, pretty good, the 2 left tackles. So I'm not going to get too much into that. We'll look real quick. Their defensive grades. Luvu had a really nice game. Bobby Wagner, their inside linebackers really played well. Some other players. Down the bottom, a couple guys didn't do great. Sherzan Newton, a guy that we like but has struggled. He has some injury issues though, right? They've got a couple guys that have struggled. Their cornerback, Emmanuel Forbes, that's a guy. He has not been good for them. He's a guy who was a first-round pick, and he's not good so far. Just we're not going to get too far into that. But then what I like to do is I like to kind of wrap it up by looking at our lineups. And I'll tell you, listen, I know it's been rough, but this looks so much better than what we're used to seeing. Especially that offensive line. Look how much green there is, and even the bluish green here. Beecham has had his issues. It's not perfect, but this is so much better than we're used to, right? Just think about, remember the Billy Price days, and even last year, Elijah Wilkinson, his just the orange and red that we're seeing there, and it's just they've got some work to do, right? But there's also just some really, overall, this is encouraging. They've built a solid offensive line, right? Harrison, McBride, Dortch, Wilson, some solid grades are Murray, Connor, good, right? So the offensive side is grading pretty well. They built something here that, you can work with, right? The defensive side, as we talked about, needs some work, right? There's some standouts. Collins graded well. Gardick and Baker have graded well this season. Wilson, they've had rough games there, but the defensive interior line, not great. Thomas, Murphy, Bunting, When we go into the nickel, we get some different players out there. We get Garrett Williams there, right? So the defense is still very spotty. That's being generous, right? The offense, though, you want to see a few more guys get to the darker blue, right? You want to see a couple stars emerge. You want to see Murray's grade go up. You want to see maybe Harrison's go up. You want to maybe see one other guy, someone, right? But this is a good foundation to build from. In terms of just at a glance, right? Let's get some comments here. Yeah, Forbes has been horrendous, 100%. Dana's saying something that's interesting on that low PFF grade for Lopez is that he had the lowest average separation from the quarterback for us per next gen sets. Interesting. So in terms of getting close to it, I'm not sure. I'm not sure why they didn't translate to better pass rush grade. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. Marco saying McBride needs to go back to being the focus in this offense. No QB targeting his tight end more than Kylan 22. Interesting. Yeah, I would like to see McBride be a bigger part, right? And that then frees up Harrison even too, right? So yeah. Mizaki Felix taking Herod to the floor was still a mistake. Should have traded in a dress that defensive line, right? Yeah, right. But yeah, listen. I think there's been a plan here. The plan has been the offense, get the stars there, and bring in some vets on the defense and build that a little more slowly and try to coach up the defense. I think that's been the plan. It's struggling right now. Darius Robinson coming back hopefully will help, but he's a rookie, so we can't put all of our hope in that. But that hopefully can help with the interior defensive line some. But listen, they're going to have to add an infusion of talent into this defense next offseason, no doubt, right? That's your code. Is that your code for should have not drafted a receiver first round and should have drafted a defensive lineman? I know you were I think more on kind of the trade back kind of approach on that. Am I decoding correctly? So I'm gonna call you Professor too, all right, Professor? All right. Okay, so listen, it was a rough game. There's no way around it. There are some things they're building, but they need to get some things fixed, right? Did I get your code right? Nice. Okay. All right. So that's making the grade. The grade they made this week was mostly an F. But, listen, I get it. We're frustrated. This is a really bad loss. A team that I thought we should have won against. I want to see the bigger sample size. I want to see what it looks like when the season's over. And then we're going to evaluate it, right? Again, even good teams have a bad loss once in a while. So I don't want to overreact to one game. Let's see what it looks like when we've got a lot more under our belt. But it was discouraging, no doubt. There's no two ways about it. So, all right, well, I am going to put up my shout outs to the channel members and then get the song going, and we're going to get out of here. So thank you all for hanging out with us tonight. It's not as much fun when they don't win, but we're here doing the work, right? So we'll see you next week, and hopefully we'll have better results to talk about. All right, everyone. Peace.
Hey, yo, it's Joe. He's the host of Mock Draft Monday on the Cardinals show. So join the live, hit like and subscribe. Enjoy the podcast tonight. Enjoy the podcast tonight.